Welcome to the League of Women Voters of the Pasadena area's Thursday night with the League presenting Civil Discourse, Dialogue Across the Differences. This is going to be a panel discussion. We will allow time at the end of the discussion to have Q&A and dialogues with the panelists. Ooh, it became quiet. That's nice. Okay. We want to thank All Saints Episcopal Church for generously offering this space for our meeting. Thank you so much. Please enjoy the refreshments, and a small donation to cover the cost of the refreshments would be really welcomed and appreciated. Also, thank you to Pasadena Media. Pasadena Media are recording this event, and then the video will be available to view or share on our YouTube channel. You need to look for the link to YouTube on our website, and the homepage for the website is www.lwv-pa.org. I got that? Okay. We also want to thank League member Cynthia Kennedy, who in collaboration with Jason Lyon here, has actually inspired this event, and Cynthia shepherded it through the process of putting it together. When you get a bunch of strong-minded women, it takes a while to get to the end of the process. So thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Jason. So I'm really excited about this topic. So first, I'd like to introduce our illustrious panelists. The first is Pasadena District 7 Council Member Jason Lyon. Next to Jason is Susan Rico. Susan's title is a Southern California co-coordinator of Braver Angels, an organization seeking to bridge the partisan divide. It's a really interesting website. And, we're going to clap at each one. And next to Susan is Juliana Serrano. Juliana is known to you All Saints folks. She was here a long time. She is now on the Pasadena Police Civilian Oversight Commission, and she's VP of Advocacy and Equity at Planned Parenthood, Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley. And last but not least is Reverend Tim Hartley. He's an Episcopal priest at the Church of Our Savior in San Gabriel. Okay, so would each of you like to take a minute and introduce yourselves a little bit more than that, starting with Jason? Oh, you need to turn it on. Yep, there you go.
Can you hear me? There we go. Okay. My name is Jason Lyon. I am on the Pasadena City Council representing District 7, which is the district at the sort of south central part of the city from roughly the Pasadena Playhouse across Caltech and PCC, and then all the neighborhoods that surround them below. So that's my district. It's a good one. And I was elected to the city council in 2022, and a big part of my desire to run for the council was a desire to sort of change the tone of the conversation in politics. And I'm relatively powerless to make, I'm fully powerless actually, to make any difference at the national level. But I thought I could make a difference here in Pasadena because I started to see a little creeping in the direction of negativity and vitriol in our politics, and I still see us creeping that way. And it's for me, it's deeply important that we find a way to talk to each other and honor each other, not in spite of our beliefs, but fully embracing those differences in each other. So that's sort of why I wanted to be here, and thanks to Cynthia for pulling this together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you, Cynthia, for having me and for hosting this event. And I'm hoping you'll update us on the Dodgers scores if anything happens, please. So thank you for being here despite that.
3-1, bottom of the third.
Okay, thank you. Good. I'm Susan Rico. I am Southern California co-coordinator for Braver Angels. I've been in this work for about 5 years now. Our organization began in 2016 with a group of Trump voters and Clinton voters after the election who came together for a workshop that was based in the methods of family therapy. And I can tell you that the methods work. I've been doing this work for 5 years now, and I feel like it has changed me as a person for the better. I feel like I'm less reactive, calmer, and able to engage in discourse in a more productive way. And so I invite you to our website. We'll talk more about it later. Just in a few sentences, we are a nationwide, grassroots, volunteer-led, cross-partisan movement dedicated to turning down the toxicity in our political discourse. And like I said, we do it with one conversation, one event at a time. We bring people together across the divide, and we have structured events that make it for a productive, respectful conversation. And thank you for having me here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Juliana Serrano. My pronouns are she, ella, and I'm delighted to be here tonight. Thanks to Jason for inviting me to participate in this conversation. And thanks to the League for hosting it, and my family here at All Saints, too. It was mentioned earlier that I worked here. I worked here for 11 years as the director of the Office for Creative Connections and Peace and Justice, and continued my work that I started at the very beginning of my career that really focused on bringing people together around our differences and establishing common understanding. And that's work that I continue to do in my role at Planned Parenthood as we talk about abortion and sexual and reproductive rights in this new political climate. That's a big part of my role in public affairs. And it's something that I do also as a community police oversight commissioner. I was appointed by the City Council in 2021 to our city's first ever Community Police Oversight Commission. It was something that I fought for in coalition with a variety of community activists and partners in order to see that our community and our police department had a better relationship than it's ever had, and to make sure that our police department, which is a good police department, was even better. And that could be made even better by having more conversations with community members and learning about what the community needs and wants out of our police department, instead of the police department determining that for itself. And so I'm very proud of the work that, again, I and activists were part of for close to 10 years before we saw the City Council approval of that commission. And it's a really important part of my lived experience here in Pasadena. I am a resident in Pasadena, have lived here for, 12 years now, and definitely consider this my home. So showing up in this aspect of community service is deeply personal and important to me. So looking forward to our conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. First, I want to say thank you to the League for holding and sponsoring this event. I think it's wonderful. And I'm so honored to be with this panel, too. Susan represents an organization, Braver Angels, that I have admired for a long time, and I really encourage you to check it out. My story, or why I'm here, is I imagine is not just because I wear a collar, but after the 2016 election, I became really disillusioned with the toxicity, and really it became just untenable for me. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was losing my mind. So what I decided to do was to have conversations with people who had different political perspectives than my own, and I set out to do it one-on-one, and I used Facebook in order to find those people, and people reached out to their uncles or the people in the mailroom or, the coworkers, and I started to get these people who were on different sides of the political aisle from where I was and wanted to meet for lunch. And so I did that one-on-one, and we met for lunch, and that had a dramatic change. It still has a dramatic effect on the way that I look at and approach, civil discourse and our politics today. It's not to say that I don't have slips and and revert to anger and frustration, but that has been really important for me. And then in 2019, I did a TED Talk that talked about that experience. One funny thing is I will note is that experience really was from, I was a parishioner here at All Saints, and I found that when we would go up to the communion rail, that we were equals at that point. And so what I thought was I really wanted to do it over lunch. But when you do a TED Talk, it can't be political. It can't be political or religious. And so I had to pull out all of the religious things of it. I did get it in the title. It's building bridges by breaking bread or something like that, right? That was my one nod to it that they let me slip in. But anyway, thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here today. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Okay, so the first question I'm going to ask each of you to respond as you wish. So the question is, what does civil discourse mean to you, and why is it important in a democracy?
Brought a cheat sheet for this one. I'm going to refer to a lovely book by Alexandra Hudson called The Soul of Civility. And in it, she makes the distinction between politeness and civility, which I think is a very important distinction. And if I might, I'll just read a little passage here. Civility is a disposition, a way of seeing others as beings endowed with dignity and inherently valuable. Politeness, by contrast, is a technique. It is decorum, mores, and etiquette. Politeness is neither good nor bad itself. It can be used for good or for ill, depending on a person's inner motivation. Civility, on the other hand, requires rediscovering a general regard for our fellow persons and citizens. It demands that we revive the basic respect we're all owed and that we owe to one another in light of our shared moral status as members of the human community. We need the disposition that comes from seeing other persons as intrinsically valuable and worthy of respect despite deep differences. And I just want to emphasize those last three words that are so important. Despite deep differences, we can have very strong differences, but we can still come together and we can dislike an idea without disliking the person. Or we can hate an idea, but not hate the person. Sorry for using someone else's words, but I thought they were just too good not to share.
All right, thank you. Juliana?
So when I think of civil discourse, I'm reminded of something I learned in elementary school. And I was thinking today, which was it my third grade, my fourth grade teacher who taught us we can agree to disagree without being disagreeable. And it's a little slogan that I've carried with me throughout my life, I think. Like, what does that look like? And maybe to Tim's point, I have not always succeeded in agreeing to disagree without being disagreeable, especially maybe in my own families where sometimes these conversations take on a different technique, right? But I think for me, one of the things that I've learned to feel comfortable with, and I do in my various professional roles that I've served over the years, is come to the understanding that when we don't agree, when we're having conversations, when we're in dialogue, and when we don't agree, it doesn't mean that we have to be in conflict with one another. And I know sometimes that is an association that does connect to our family systems. That, when there was disagreement in the household, when I had a different opinion from my father and we were clashing over something, that all of a sudden there was conflict, there was a fight, it was an argument, that there was this escalation in tension and emotions. And so for me, civil discourse means we can be in a space of being in non-agreement without feeling like we're in conflict with one another, and that we can hold that tension and still value and respect and appreciate one another when we walk away from the table, when we walk out of the room. And I think the other part of civil discourse that I think is really important, especially as I think about like the civil part of it, right? It's not just about the politeness. That's not really what we mean, but that these conversations that we have, that they're for the benefit of all of us, that they're for the benefit of society. And I think about some of these conversations, again, that I've had over years around whether or not there was a role that civilians, community members could play in elevating the work of our police department, improving the work of our police department, improving police-community relations. Just how, whether the conversations were in public, or maybe one-on-ones. I mean, I had over the years so many one-on-ones with officers to learn more about where they were coming from and for them to hear more from me about what the community was thinking and feeling and experiencing. But that was all kind of in the service of the public, of the community, that we were having these conversations. And so that comes up for me when I think about civil discourse.
The civil part for me is about respectful curiosity, right, and knowing what someone else is thinking or where they're coming from. And I love that. I love what you read about that, because I'll say more about that later. But I think the other piece of that is the discourse part, which is really an exchange of ideas, at least from my perspective. And that, I think, is one of the more important parts of this civil discourse. It's not just being polite. And I think a lot of people, at least that I encounter, will say to me, "Oh, that sounds wonderful. Yes, that's why we don't talk about politics in here." And I always think like that for me is just as problematic. It is an inauthenticity that when experienced feels like something's wrong, right? When people are authentic, even with disagreements, and they are approaching it authentically, that discourse, then it seems to work well. So I often have some of the best relationships with those people with whom I disagree, because we talk about this. We talk about the political debates. We talk about what's happening, as opposed to avoiding and having to tap dance around, an issue. So those are my thoughts on civil discourse.
For me, civil discourse is an intentional practice of trying to discuss or deliberate about issues with other people, with a sense of curiosity and openness and genuine interest in where other people are coming from, that is not primarily centered on winning at the end of the discussion. So, and it comes up a lot. So my elected office is a nonpartisan seat. I am a partisan person. I have political views. I have strong political views. You would identify them most of you who know me could guess. You would identify my party quickly. But that doesn't mean I only represent the people in my district who agree with my views. I'm there to represent our shared values. So I have to find a way to talk past kind of conventional political discourse and to genuinely understand where people are coming from. So when I was running for office, I knocked on every door in my district, except some of the multifamilies where you can't get in. over the course of a year. So I walked, I talked, I knocked on doors, and lots of people disagreed with me about things I want to do in the city, things I think we need to do, things I think are priorities. And rather than walking away from those doors or deciding like that's not a conversation, that's not a vote for me, those are the houses where I ended up sitting down on the porch with people and really exchanging ideas and trying to come to a sense of understanding about why people feel the way they feel, how they got to their perspective, what matters to them, and ultimately looking for the place where the Venn diagram of our beliefs, right? Where do we overlap? What value do we share? And with most human beings, you get there. Where there is we all want love in our lives. We all want our families to be healthy and thrive. And so if we can find our place to those common things and then kind of work out from there, it works better. Has been my experience.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your perspectives on that. Okay, Tim, Reverend Hartley, I should say.
Fine, but
Is this important from a spiritual faith community perspective?
yes, I mean, I think the obvious answer is yes. I would hope it's the obvious answer, but I think our spirituality, our mindfulness practices, our religion are things that that supersede some of our political worlds. So from that standpoint, I do, but I don't think that they can be fully separated. I think sometimes people think of religion as being, I've heard this before, I want to come to church and not hear about politics. That isn't necessarily, that gets to the same point that I mentioned earlier, which is to avoid things becomes problematic, I think, in getting to an authentic exchange of ideas. And so I do think it's important. I think it is a way to ground some people. For others, they have different tools for doing that. But for me, it is a way to ground myself and to approach these relationships or these situations in a way that I hope is more generous.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions for you. And anybody who wants to start with the response is fine. Anybody can join in. I want this to be as conversational as possible. Okay, so have we in our country descended into tribes where people don't talk to people who are not in their tribe? And what can we do about this?
Yes, I think we are descending into tribes, and we're sorting ourselves politically and geographically and in so many ways, which is really unfortunate. So it's up to us, and I resonated so strongly with what all my other panelists said about it's important for us to break through that and to reach out outside of our tribe and to find people with whom we disagree and to have those productive discussions. And like Jason said, find that Venn diagram, find the overlap, because there almost always is something there. I did also want to mention the work of Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, who is quite renowned. He's on the board of directors of Braver Angels, and he has a lot of writing associated with this tribal behavior. And I think it's important work to read and understand and sort of break out of your moral matrix and look into the moral matrix of the other tribe and try to understand from their point of view. So I highly recommend his work on this subject.
Yeah, I think we're all going to agree that we're devolving into tribes. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and kind of ironically, in this age when we have so many more ways to communicate instantly with people anywhere in the world, we somehow have found a way to make our world smaller and smaller and smaller. So the how to break out of it is, for me, about being really intentional about seeking out perspectives, asking questions, being curious about people. And honestly, seeking out other perspectives in your reading, in your television watching. Frankly, never watching television news. I think at this point, all television news is designed to freak people out, and it has different flavors of freaking people out, but it's all designed to. The 24-hour news cycle is everything has to be a big deal, and everything's not necessarily a big deal, right? And so we don't have any way of tempering that for ourselves. But I guess that's the biggest way to break out of it, is being really intentional about exposing ourselves to other ways of thinking and being and living.
So I agree, yes, without a doubt. And, this is something that I will confess that I'm struggling with even right now. And I think that Jason and I have even had conversations about it, because especially I think when you're in that space of needing to be curious and reaching out and bringing people in and meeting people where they're at and engaging in conversations, and again, holding this tension around maybe non-agreement, when that's your 9 to 5, so to speak, or for those of us, many of us, our jobs are more than just the amount of time we spend in any given day. What I'm finding more and more is in my personal time, not wanting to spend any time with folks with whom I hold any disagreements. And it's honestly, I've had many conversations with folks over the past several weeks. Right now we're in an election cycle, right? And feeling like, yeah, I want to be with my tribe. I want to be with my people who share my values. And so when it's a Saturday night, I don't want to have a dinner with somebody who doesn't believe in the same things that I believe in. I do that Monday through Friday in many ways in my work. And so there's this both and there that I'm really struggling with, where I love my tribe, and I'm also trying to break down the tribalism that exists in our society today in this political climate, right? And so what does that mean for me if I'm struggling, again, where I'm feeling like I want to, on a personal level, just really connect more and more and learn more from those people with whom I have agreements with rather than disagreements. So that's just more of a confession than it is a response to or a call to action around it, but being very forthcoming with you around how I'm struggling in my own life with this tribalism that exists.
I was going to let this one go, but I'll be a little contrarian and offer a little bit of hope. At least this is where I'm not so sure that it is. I feel like because of the information sources that we have siloed pieces of information. We have an anonymous way, essentially, to, without consequences, to interact online and in comment sections, that what we end up seeing becomes this ideal in our head about what's actually happening in the world. And I know from my experience on Sundays, being at a church that has people from all different political backgrounds who are voting for different people, that because I know them, that there is a connection that exceeds some of our political disagreements. And that is not to say that our political disagreements aren't big. I went to Idaho this past weekend to do a funeral. I'd never been to Idaho before, but I realized as I was standing there, saying, "Oh, my friend is, we're using her ranch, and we needed a podium, and so she built this thing, and other people were working around." And then halfway through, I realized these are all people online where we would be separated into very different things. And yet, in those interactions, I would have told you that it felt like family and neighbors, right? So I'm going to be a little optimistic and say that.
What you say is so true, because every time, I'm not kidding, every time people come out of our Brave Angels workshops, they say, almost all of them say, you know what, we're not as divided as we've been told we are. And they find those common values. And I think part of it is about just being face to face with people, you know, and just stepping out from behind the keyboard and the news screen and all that and just talking. And Joanne, I also resonated very much with what you said about your honesty, that it's a struggle, and it's a struggle for me too. I've been doing this for 5 years and I still am learning new things and having to have some real introspection about slip-ups and I think the slip-ups happen mostly when you're around your tribe, right? So we have this workshop called Depolarizing Within, and part of it is about listening to your own polarizing voice, particularly when you're in groups of like-minded people, because that's when you tend to say those people, them, you know, how terrible are they? And you can feed off the energy with each other. And you can learn how to be the voice in that group of saying, well, you know, maybe there's a value here we're missing or a concern that we're missing on this particular issue. And maybe, you know, you can be that voice. So, yeah, that can be really challenging when you're with your tribe. So it takes a lot of work.
I also wanted to thank you, Juliana, for bringing that to this, because I think it's easy to sit in the panel and be like, well, we are creating peace and love everywhere we go. I mean,
We're so perfect.
daily I struggle with what to put. A lot of the way I like to communicate with the world is in social media, and I think it can be a force for good. Daily I struggle with how to talk about politics in a way that is that I think is productive or invites dialogue as opposed to shutting it down. And I want to share a little story. So I have an 11-year-old son. For anybody who doesn't know, just full disclosure, I'm married to Reverend Tim Hartley at the other end of the table. And we have two boys, one of whom is 11. And one of my sons called someone trash the other day about a person. And I was like, oh, people aren't trash. Everyone has value. And he got that. That was great. We had great dialogue. And he was like, well, but the exception is one of the candidates for president. And I was like, no. Did you get that from us? Because, yeah, no, especially that person that is the hardest to love. That's the person where you need to remember, like, no, that's another human being. But it was a kind of stark reminder that there are mixed messages in my household, right? So it is, I do think this is work that we just have to keep coming back to and back to and back to.
Wow, thank you, you guys. Thank you for the offers of hope. That's really welcome at this point. Okay, so are there specific skills we can use to communicate with others?
Sorry, this is kind of our wheelhouse. That's what Braver Angels is all about, is about the skills and tools that we can give people to work with to do this productively. We have tons of workshops that you can sign up for at braverangels.org. And I'll just give you maybe a few highlights of some of those skills. We have one skill that's called the LAP skill, L-A-P-P. Listen, acknowledge, pivot, perspective. Now the listen sounds pretty obvious. Listen and try not to be formulating your next argument while the other person is still talking, and make it so that you can fully repeat back to them what they said. And in fact, that's one of our workshops we do. You listen to the person before you and you have to repeat back what they said to show that you listened and get acknowledgement that yes, you're understanding what they said. So that's the acknowledgement. The pivot, that's the first P, that's magic. And this comes from our leader, Bill Doherty, the family therapist. It's sort of like a turn signal and signaling to the other person that after you've listened and acknowledged, hey, I'm going to take a little different direction here. It's like putting the turn signal on your car. You say, you know, I understand, I'm hearing your point of view and I think I understand what you're saying, but I have a little bit of a different perspective. Are you open to hearing it? You've asked the question, and if you get acknowledgement, a nod or a yes, then they have opened the door for you to share your perspective. That is like a magic opening of the heart and mind of the other person to what you have to say and to truly listen to what you're saying. They've bought into it because they said, yes, I want to hear what you have to say. That's the pivot, and that's magic. It sounds kind of corny, but I've used it many times, and I've got to tell you it works. Then the last P is the perspective. After you've done the pivot and gotten permission to share your perspective, you share. If you don't get permission, you don't have to go there and just say, okay, well, we can disagree. There's a place and a time for everything, but that's one skill. Another skill is using I statements instead of you, they, pointing at everybody else, because you can really only speak for yourself, right? So you say, I feel this way, I have this perspective because of this life experience. Speak for yourself and use I statements. That's one of our skills. And Jason talked about curiosity too. Exercise radical curiosity, and I want to recommend another book. This is one of our Braver Angels leaders, Monica Guzman's book, I Never Thought of It That Way. This is a fantastic book. She's a journalist based in Seattle, and she has a split family. Her mother and father are very dyed-in-the-wool Republican, and she is very liberal, and they've had struggles, and she has learned a lot through her life and brings that to the book. And it's just about being super curious, as Jason said and others have said. So there's a lot of skills in this book that you can learn that will help you out. And also, of course, come to Braver Angels workshops.
So I'll share a few things that I feel like have been helpful to me as I've engaged in civil discourse, especially being an advocate, activist for a lot of different social justice issues. Sometimes, yes, the I stories, the I statements are really, really, really important, offering that perspective of your own. And if you have the ability to share the perspectives of other people, so long as you have their permission, essentially, but in as much as you know somebody who's impacted by maybe the topic that you're discussing, and you have a story, an anecdote that can be really helpful. I have found that to be very beneficial. And stories alone oftentimes aren't enough, especially as I think about doing advocacy or lobbying work, when you're in that role of trying to engage in conversation with people who are not seeing the way you're seeing things in terms of the benefit of that bill or that policy or something. So those stories may not always be enough, but when coupled with data, with facts, that then ends up kind of I've on so many occasions just seen people hear me differently when I'm able to present that information. So that the personal stories, when available, those other sort of perspectives and anecdotes of others, kind of coupled with data and or facts, I think ends up really advancing conversations in a really, really helpful, productive way. And then the other thing, I learned this so many years ago, and it's also something that sticks with me every now and then. I'm like, oh, okay, it's happening here. I'm asking myself these questions. When engaged in a conversation, in particular with multiple people or groups of people, this thing that I'm thinking in response to maybe something that was said, do I need to be the person who says it? Do I need to be the person who pushes? Is that me, or is there maybe somebody else in the room who that would be far better coming from? The other is, does it need to be said right now, right? And that kind of goes back to something I said earlier, is that sometimes, a lot of these conversations, these dialogues that we have, they might be better served sort of behind closed doors, so to speak, or with more sense of privacy or confidentiality, right? Like this may not be the moment to come out and in a group, kind of push back on someone, because that may get them to completely shut down. And so does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said right now? Are things that are really, I think, important in sort of advancing conversations and ensuring that they don't, hit a wall, because we've all been there, and I think that, oftentimes it doesn't have to be you and that moment, and just sort of liberating yourself from like, not today. And that might be the next conversation I have with this person. We might go there then, and knowing that it's a journey and being okay with that. Because again, to Jason's point earlier, in engaging in this discourse, it's not about the win in the moment, right? And we can so easily convince ourselves of that and say, oh, I walked away and I didn't do well in that I didn't convince them. They didn't see it my way, and fail to realize that these are hopefully going to be conversations that happen over time that lead to greater understanding between differing people.
The score is 5-2 in the bottom of the fourth, just so that's Dodgers, yes. So I felt like that was important to say. So anecdotally, my experience is that having a one-on-one conversation with somebody and surviving that, and actually getting to respect and know that person is one of the best tools that I have. Now, you might think, well, that doesn't help in cocktail parties or at my family dinner table, but it actually does for me. What I have found is that when I have those discussions and I break through to a deeper understanding with someone who I disagree with politically, that then softens me in a way that I am allowed to interact in a more tolerant, generous way with others. And I have a lot of trouble with that still, but that is one of the tools that if I employed better, I would be a better person.
Another great website. I'm going to advocate for Living Room Conversations. They have a website where you can pick a topic, you can get together some friends, and it's a conversation guide, and it will lead you through it to have a good conversation about it. So that's just Living Room Conversations. So look it up.
So I guess mine is all of what they said. I particularly appreciated that you said I statements, because we knew we were going to be talking about this particular thing. So I jotted down today all my thoughts about the things, and I noticed that I put it twice. Keep the focus on yourself. And then, so people, the holidays are coming, Thanksgiving's not so far away, people start to get anxious about extended family and political discussions, and I always like to ask people, like, oh, do you engage those discussions? Like, that's the time to have the conversation, and people are like, oh, no, I don't bother, because you can never change their minds. And I'm like, that's the tell, that's the thing, right? That's not the point. The point is to engage in dialogue, just to come to the table and have a respectful conversation and try to understand someone else's perspective. And even more, if you can come to the table and be open to being changed by the other person, which is like a next level, there's spiritual growth in it, there's political growth in it, and that's where we find our way back together as a society, right? Just being open and not so defended and not so about fighting a position all the time. And then there was one more. Oh, so the other one that's big for me is trying to look at the world from the other person's perspective rather than expecting them to look at the world from mine. So not everyone has the experiences I have. Not everyone has the advantages I've had. Not everyone has the traumas I've had. So I have my own particular perspective on the world. But if I can try to see how they got to their perspective on the world, then at least I become a better human being, and maybe we both do. Right?
Wonderful information. So the healthy curiosity, is stuck in my brain, and the one-on-oneness is stuck in my brain. So that's wonderful. There is a time, I know, I'm going to ask you my own personal question at this point. So you have somebody that you would like to have a dialogue with, but they get really angry even if you begin, and it's really hard to get an understanding of them. So what do you do about that? Was that clear enough, my question?
Yes, I'll jump in so we can just pass down. I think in some ways you can't force it, right? If you're, I think both people have to come to that conversation with some sense of good faith. And if both people can't do that, it might not be the time for the conversation. But that's where you employ some of those techniques about, would it be different if we were one-on-one? Would it be different if we weren't one-on-one, when there's sort of a nice neutral third there who could kind of facilitate dialogue? Or can you get them to just start answering questions, talking about things? Not questions like, why do you believe that? Because those are hard questions, but observing things and saying, so I think I'm hearing that, physical safety is really important to you. So where does that come from? What do you think that's about? And so you move the conversation kind of off the central topic, but into the values and the experiences that surround that topic, so that you make room for conversation. Then you find your way into the hard thing.
It's great. It helps you understand and get a better understanding of the person. Tim's point.
That was wonderful. I really can't add anything to that. That was well said.
I will just say I've had those moments where people are coming at me real hot. And it's really important to me to protect my own safety. And I can have a boundary of like, okay, well then we're not going to go there. Because I want to protect myself also, and not have to put myself in a situation that's going to feel, hostile or uncomfortable for me. And sometimes even just naming that, like, okay, you're not making me feel safe or comfortable, can then also diffuse the person, because they're like, oh, that's not what I wanted. I didn't mean to do that. It's like, oh, okay, great. So if that's not what you wanted, so then how can we best now move forward and approach it if you still want to stay in it and participate in the conversation? But kind of like naming sometimes a little bit, a person's maybe like the energy with which they're entering into that can kind of help turn it down a little bit. But I do feel like it's also important to protect oneself and say, I don't feel ready for this conversation, and to step away, and hopefully you can re-engage that person or those persons and on another occasion. But also, again, it's been very important to me to say it doesn't have to be right now. Sometimes we feel the pressure of the moment, like maybe I'll never get another opportunity. There will be another opportunity, maybe with another person who is in that same position, and you will want to engage them then, and that will be great. But just trying to not always get it all in feels important.
I just put it in a sermon, and then they have to listen while I'm preaching. But not everyone has that option. I'm kidding, of course, but in hearing Jason talk, I have to say I have heard him. And I know Rick Cole is here too, city council member elect, and these guys go out and have these discussions with people that seem terrifying to me, at door to door. I could not do it, I think, and we've had this discussion before. Whereas pastorally, I can do that frequently. I can do that from that perspective. And so I think, though, we end up accomplishing the same thing, but in different approaches. I do think that feels hard for me too, with some family members, actually. I'm not sure that if both of us aren't willing, to meet halfway, that we can actually have that conversation. So what's important for me, like to echo what you said, is just to be comfortable with where I am in that relationship.
Gee, now I don't know about these next two questions.
And now I just want to add that, I'm learning new things every day. And so I'm just learning from what y'all are saying and about that protecting of the self and stating your own needs. That's a good takeaway for me.
Thank you. You guys are great. Oh, we do. Well, I have, yeah, we can. I'm willing to go with the crowd. Yes. So we'll begin to collect questions. Hang on. I'm going to turn around a little bit if I can stand up and not pass out again. I apologize to all of you that I've had my back to you. I'm really sorry about that. Okay.
Do you ever find that humor can be appropriate in these situations?
Always. Yeah, I would say that's a big one for both of us. And one of for me, the easiest ways to connect with people, to, whether that's humor about the conversation we're having or the awkwardness of the conversation. But yes, for me, it's a huge way.
Yeah, and just how I think about some of the hardest, most courageous conversations I've been a part of when there was an opportunity to laugh, how just, amazing that then feels. Because all of a sudden, right, you feel connected to a person. When you're laughing at the same thing, you're sharing a same chuckle, all of a sudden it's like, see, that's it. That's it.
Self-deprecating humor is key too. It's like, of course, I'm an expert in all of these things, so people come to me for advice on everything.
I feel like somewhat you've answered some of these already. So one was, what about the person who is ill-informed? It sounds like at that point we're trying to convince somebody before we try to understand them.
Well, there may be something we're missing. So just be open to that. I've learned things from the other side that really kind of changed my worldview a little bit. And don't be afraid of going into these things, because you might actually learn something and change your mind on an issue. And also, you may think they're ill-informed. You may think they're saying things that aren't true. But there's a kernel of truth in it anyway. Like I think Jason or others were saying, there might be a feeling of unsafety for some reason. Say there's many new people in their community that they don't know. There's a rise in crime. There are underlying concerns that might be driving this misinformation that they're hanging on to. So you can get at that. Like, what's the underlying concern? What is the kernel of truth? Like some of these communities with a large influx of immigrants, whether be they undocumented or documented, some of the misinformation may be reflecting an underlying concern about the rapid changes in their community and what they're having to respond to there. So there can be a kernel of truth there, despite the misinformation.
Yeah, I would just add to that, that again, sometimes what we think is an ill-informed person is really somebody who just their perception is different, and their feelings around the topic are different. It's not that they're ill-informed or uneducated or they don't know, but that like really at the core of it is that they're responding and showing up maybe based more in that feeling space, and their perception of maybe what actually is happening, and the feelings that draws on them. And so for me, I going into conversations with people with whom I may have difference, I'll never assume that they're ill-informed. We may discover that together over the course of our conversation. And I've had that. I mean, again, my day job is in reproductive rights. I've had tons of people who have said to me, "Oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. I thought that your organization only does abortions," right? It's like, no, that's not the only thing that we do, right? But they didn't have, and so we may discover that together, that there was an absence of information for them, but that they, are really kind of responding to more to maybe some perceptions that they've absorbed over time.
So is there anything else that we could do to avoid the current toxic political situation and help support democracy?
Yeah, so speaking as an elected official, one of the big drivers of this are our own leaders, are the people that we're handing power to. So holding your candidates accountable, the politicians that you support, for the way they talk to other people and the way they campaign, is critical. And so, and I'm not saying, one of our problems is that we right now seem as a society to be vacillating between extremes. So I'm not saying if you basically like someone but their rhetoric is horrible, drop them, because we got to learn to embrace the gray more. But I do think you write a letter. If you know them, you walk up to them and say, hey, hated the mailer that you did. It really, and here's why. And please don't do that. Because I feel strongly that we're all participating in this system, right? We're all contributing in some way to this breakdown in dialogue in society, and the consequence in the long run, if we keep toward extreme polarization, is civil war. And everyone thinks, that can't happen in a modern country like America. It can and it does. And all in all, I would prefer not to live that experience. So hold people accountable and hold yourself accountable.
Yeah, and riffing off what you're saying about holding politicians accountable and your elected leaders, there are ways that they can do better, in my opinion. There's the Common Ground Committee is a wonderful organization that rates, gives a common ground score to most politicians across the country, and you can look them up and see how is your person doing, how is your elected official doing as far as taking in more sides into account. In Congress, there's a Problem Solvers Caucus. My representative is not a part of it, and I would like him to be. And that caucus is not about giving up on deeply held beliefs, but it's finding where's that Venn diagram of overlap where we can actually get something done that most people could support. And that's what they're doing. It's good work, and we should support them and ask for our elected leaders to be part of that.
Yeah, I think just to add on what has already been said is that, as we look at candidates for office, that we ensure that they are people who are not going to contribute to the toxicity that exists in politics. And there's a way, to Jason's point, there's a way you can see that as a person's campaigning. Right? They can already display that in mailers and the way that they're showing up and candidate forums and all that stuff. And it's interesting because there's sometimes on the part of candidates seeking office and those who are sitting in office that they get invited to play into that game, right? And we can all be like, yeah, you gotta fight back. You gotta, and kind of meet the moment with the same kind of poison that you're being given. But no, instead, really support and advocate those people and highlight and amplify the ways in which they are not contributing to that toxicity in politics, I think is really, really important. But for us to all have our eyes fully open, our ears fully ready to hear, because oftentimes those signs are there. And if we've missed them and then we start seeing that play out, well, then our role as civilians, as voters, is to hold accountability at the ballot box and make sure that that person doesn't reflect what I want out of my leader and the behavior that I want of my leaders. And so then we have to sometimes vote people out.
Was the question about holding them accountable? Avoiding toxicity. Okay, here's my answer then. I had two answers. For me, if I maintain, of course, the guy with the collar, if I maintain a spiritual practice, if I meditate on a regular basis, if I run on a regular basis, although I have plantar fasciitis, so I can't do that, if I exercise on a regular basis, if I take care of my spiritual self, I am much better. And it doesn't bring about apathy, actually. It's the opposite. It brings about empathy in me, and I can approach situations and not feel the sting of toxicity. That's for me. That's how that kind of works.
Thank you all. I appreciate your answers. We all appreciate your answers. Questions? Now we can do the Q&A, and I'll give up my microphone.
Hi, I'm Chastity Nunez. I live in San Gabriel, so just a little ways from here. And thank you for all of your comments. It, for me, seems like a very elevated, enlightened place that I am hoping to get to soon. And so in that respect, and you mentioned your 11-year-old, I'm wondering what work you do with youth and young adults, because they're at a time, if we all remember, where you're very action-driven about whatever you're passionate about. And I think some of these skills that you mentioned, people would have when they get to be our ages, if we could start to teach them when they are younger.
We are in the Braver Angels has programs in our schools across the country, and especially in Southern California, in high schools and in colleges. We have Braver campuses. We are partners with Bridge USA, which is another great bridging organization in college campuses. But yeah, we've brought our work to across the Irvine School District, as a matter of fact, and it's having a big effect. We ran a workshop for all of the administrators in the entire school district. It was a day-long workshop that was required for them to go to. And so they can bring this skill set into their classrooms and teach it to the kids. We've run workshop with kids as well, and they're always well received. We don't do it in the political dichotomy, but more just about other issues and about how to get along and how to disagree better. Not so much about politics, but yeah, we can take this work to kids and they appreciate it.
The Western Justice Center, which is a nonprofit based here in Pasadena, also does this work, and particularly is focused, they're sort of shifting their emphasis to work with youth and teaching problem solving and mediation techniques.
It's very dangerous to give me the microphone, you know. So I think what the people here are kind of self-selected. And Tim, you talked about reaching out to people. Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of forums we might, or fora we might develop to encourage more of that without that mediating, you know, social media kind of interface?
So what I did, and what I still think is so important, is that for me, those discussions and that movement happen one-on-one, and that it to the extent that I try to do anything in a group, it doesn't seem to work. The progress that I've seen has been one-on-one, and that involves, you know, one person both people self-selecting into that dialogue. And so that was, you know, that was an effort to get people to reach out, friends, to link people up. I know Braver Angels has something as well that can do that, so I'll let her speak to that.
And you're right about the self-selection. That's a big issue. So the way Braver Angels handles that is that we tend to get more people from the left side of the spectrum, because those are the people that really want to more talk things out. And whereas we find that people on the right they're more about action. Let's go out and help people. Let's do community service. And another thing, so we try really hard to design our events to appeal to the whole spectrum. If everybody's not in the room, if we only have one side in the room, we're not depolarizing. We need everybody represented. So from the top down, we have leadership that is from both the left and the right, and that's a rule. Every local alliance, every part of our organization has to have equal membership from the left, or equal leadership on the left and the right, and that's one thing. We also design some events. We have debates that we run that are very much attract people on the right. And we do it in a different format. It's not a debate to win. It's about a debate to express your point of view on a given issue. But we write the resolutions that we're debating can be quite, sharp. Yeah, you know what I'm. So that gets people's interest, and they come because here's a real interesting resolution, and I disagree with that. But the format of the debate is not about winning. We're about expressing your views and understanding, and you don't have to be 100% behind the resolution. You can say, well, I agree with this part of it, but not that part of it. And we get rave reviews over these debates, and it does tend to attract people from across the spectrum. And we alternate the resolutions, one to favor one side more and another one to favor another side more, to try to draw in more diverse groups. And that is really working for us. But you're right, it's always a struggle.
I love the idea of doing the issue in, and I'm about to volunteer the League of Women Voters, but I think if we could set up a series of dialogues across differences as a panel about local issues, because I feel like there's an opportunity to practice this here. Because one of the interesting things about local politics is the divide isn't necessarily red-blue or left-right. It's often much more economic. So we could have a fantastic dialogue across difference about going to 100% carbon-free energy. Converting the fleet to carbon-free. I'm going to go to all environmental things because this is what I'm passionate about. But there are a million local issues where we could practice this in a way that might be less heated. So I'm going to follow up and maybe make that happen.
Don't mind. We had a recent event that we did in conjunction with the League of Women Voters in the Torrance area. They asked us to come in and do a town hall on affordable housing. So, and it was wonderful. That community, it's a very heated topic in their community, and I would hazard a guess in most Southern California communities. And so people came in kind of hot with, I want to tell my elected leaders X, Y, and Z, and they came in and realized, that's not what this is about. This is about getting together and talking and coming up with solutions that we can agree on. A few people walked out the door in the beginning because they came for a fight, and that wasn't what it was about. But the people that stayed, we had about 50 people, and it was wonderful. So that's another thing you can do. And that attracts a lot of people because it's a concern in their community. So thank you for that.
The suggestion was thinking about using the libraries as the venue.
Yes, my question actually applied to some of the discussion we had a little earlier, but I just want to say thank you. This has been a wonderful opportunity to hear from different perspectives and things that you do and different solutions or topics and things that we can deal with. But my specific question was Thanksgiving dinner. And so it's self-serving in that way, but I think what you're saying, Tim, one-on-one, I can see where that works so well with you doing it one-on-one. I am just envisioning the Thanksgiving dinner, 30 people from different parts of the country, so we're not where we can have dialogues with them in many, times. Any techniques that you have for how to handle the Thanksgiving dinner so it lands and we eat it from the plate and it doesn't get thrown across the room?
I sound like a broken record, but we have a workshop for that. It's called Families and Politics, and it's very popular right before the holidays. And it's sort of geared around the different types of people you get in the conversation. There's different styles of approaching political discourse, and the one that sticks in my mind is the sniper, the one that is just going to throw in a sharp dig at something and then just trying to get a reaction. And it's about how to respond in that case, or diffuse the situation, or choose not to engage, or say, well, why don't we take this one-on-one, since we have a little disagreement, why don't we have a coffee and we'll go chat somewhere else after dinner.
Less a question than a slightly different framing. It's been my experience that if people are just talking, they don't have to be particularly responsible. There's an old saying we're all familiar with, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I would argue from my experience that powerlessness corrupts. And that if people have no sense of power, they can say any damn thing. But when they are given some level of responsibility for helping shape the outcome, the vast majority of people will be more responsible and more measured. And so I think it's not just getting people to talk nicely, but sharing power so that people act more responsibly and realize that it's not as easy as it sounded when you spouted off about homelessness or affordable housing, and when you're forced to sit at a table with other people and try to figure out solutions. That in and of itself brings down the temperature, and I don't think we do that enough in this community and other communities to actually give people an opportunity to help be part of decision making in a meaningful way, not just come and spout off, but actually have some responsibility for the decisions that get made.
So,
In other words, put them on a commission.
I actually agree with all of that, and I think it's. I want to make clear that what we're talking about here is dialogue, which is engagement going in two directions. We're not talking about two people sitting and waiting for the other person to shut up and not listening, right? So they're just spouting opinions at each other, which I don't think is productive. But I do think dialogue, even separate from any intended action like changing minds or going out and building permanent supportive housing, dialogue in and of itself is valuable. Just being in proximity to other ideas and other people changes us. And the place where we've seen that most prominently, that means something to me very personally, was in the LGBTQ rights movement. So there was a burgeoning movement. The AIDS crisis came along. It all sort of fell apart. Everyone, no one wanted to be near gay men because for a while you thought it was dangerous to be in the same room. And then out of the AIDS crisis and into the move for marriage equality, there was a real shift in that movement to be seen, to let people know who we are, to be visible, and to tell our neighbors, to tell our awkward uncle at the Thanksgiving table, hey, by the way, I'm gay, right? That's my husband. And what we saw was this radical shift in society where in the last 20 years, we've flipped the scale on who feels okay about gay people and who supports the rights of gay people. And by the way, I hope we're about to see that shift play out when Prop 3 passes. Please vote yes on Prop 3, which is the Marriage Equality Amendment. But just being in proximity is powerful, and I think it's important just to be at the table with someone.
Being heard makes people feel power, just not just heard, but understood. So if you really are hearing someone and really trying to understand them, then I think that gives them a sense of power that I've been heard. And I think that's a basic need of people to feel heard.
It's not a question, but it's a comment about children's books. So we were talking, or the question was about young adults, and we have this wonderful Distinguished Speakers program, and last night, I have to remember his name. Yes, Trevor Noah has a new book, and it was available to everybody, lucky us, and he said that it is on conflict resolution. And now talk to me later after I've had a chance to finish the book. But my point is that children's books that include the kind of dialogue that you're describing can be really powerful and promote conversation. Thank you.
I've heard of a bajillion things that are so interesting, and I've been writing some of them down. And I mean, I really have been, but I don't write in whole sentences always, or think in them. So, will we? I hate to give this. This is coming. Is there on your website? Let me just say that on your website will you put helpful hints for the
tired of listening or whatever, of things that have happened and references. Can League of Women Voters do that? No, I'm looking at Karen. Karen, or people who are League of Women Voters people. This has been, I should start better. This has been so informative and really helpful. And I'm not sure that we could get it all down, all of the help and all of the websites.
Yes, it's being recorded.
As a member of the board of the league, I would just like to say that, Jason, I would love to talk to you.
Do we have other questions? Well,
I was going to ask, is there a way to better celebrate kind of multi-party or bipartisan success? Because, I mean, it's ironic that to actually have a successful multi-party collaboration, almost everybody can't get what they want, and therefore the leaders of each tribe may not even claim victory on the... And the context for this was my 23-year-old son. I was talking to them, and he's so disillusioned about the effectiveness of government. And then I rhymed off, 4 or 5 things that I thought both parties had collaborated on successfully over the last couple of years, and really done a great job of, bringing in new legislation that was going to help. Anyway, just it almost takes like a third party to claim the success of a bipartisan accomplishment.
thoughts?
I actually think that probably ends up being a consequence of this change rather than a thing that leads the change. It's just right now, bipartisanship is sort of a dirty word because both parties are so driven by the extremes that we just don't value it right now. So I don't know that we can celebrate it until we get back to the place of really valuing dialogue.
Just a metaphor I like to use is for things like that, there are seeds of bipartisanship and cooperation that hopefully grow into trees and a lovely garden. And I think of what we're doing here, talking about here, as the fertilizer for the soil, and that's important too. Or maybe that's an analogy, whatever. So.
Okay. Well, since I have ownership of the mic right now, I have a sort of a question keying off what several of you had already mentioned, which is the local level, the quote, toxicity of politics. We do candidate forums in all of our area communities during election period, and we do not see toxicity and all of this, we see occasional anger, but at the local level, it is so refreshing because people are there because they have issues about potholes in the street, the children's schools, safety, all of these issues that affect their daily lives, and they want to talk to their candidates, the people who are going to be on their city council or their school board, and hear what they have to say about it. There is no toxicity at the local level. There is disagreement. There's disagreement.
I'm going to guess that
we impose civil discourse at the candidate forums, and we get civil discourse because they know why they're there. So maybe I'm being a little rosy-eyed, but we do them all the time.
I will speak for my friend. I'm going to guess that my friend Mr. Cole would disagree that there's not toxicity at the local level, because that race in particular I thought was incredibly toxic. You're not so much seeing it in-person exchanges, which is often true, that people are different when they're not looking someone in the eye. We are seeing it in mailers a lot. And we're seeing it in whisper campaigns. We're seeing it online. It is there. I will say, when I was walking around knocking on doors, I knocked on one door, and guy came to the door and I said, "Hi, I'm Jason Lyon. I'm running for city council." And he said, "You're on the planning commission, right?" And I was like, "I am." And he said, "Well, then I know you're an idiot." And it didn't get better from there. But I listened because I was sort of interested. I was like, "Oh, tell me why you think I'm an idiot." It did. Let me say, I didn't stay friendly and open during that entire conversation. There came a point when I was like, "Okay, I got to take care of me because otherwise I'm going to lose it." But we do have pockets of it.
Oh,
here,
okay.
And I do not want to see it remain.
I think what I'm trying to say is in a setting like a candidate forum, which is moderated by the League of Women Voters, where we impose certain rules of civility of discourse, which are followed almost always by all the candidates, by the audience, by the people present from the campaigns. So we know they can do it.
That's the key right there. And we set ground rules in everything we do, that these are the rules, and if you don't follow them, you are going to be corrected, and that's why you see success with that. I think it's wonderful. I just wanted to add, Jason and I think we were talking before this event about the vice presidential debate. And that was one example where we thought, it was pretty cordial and it was actually refreshing. And I got that from people on the left and the right. I mean, they might have walked away from it and then gotten back into toxicity, but at least for that moment, it was a lovely thing. And to spread your appreciation for that, I think is important.
I just want to say, I've attended the candidate forum and we've been there, and I don't know if that really qualifies as discourse the way that we have described it. It's people kind of presenting their answers to very specific questions, and we started this talk with the civility versus politeness. I think we see a lot of politeness at the candidate forums. There isn't really room for discourse. There's not a discussion between the candidates. They're asked a question and they present an answer to it. So they are very well run. They are polite. They do appear to be civil, but people are on their best behavior. Yeah.
Very, very good point. Thank you.
I want to say something about that because I think you're onto something, which is in these dialogues, in these discourses that we have with a person or persons, we can set up ground rules. And going back to the, how do we do this on Thanksgiving? I had a lot of differences with my father. And there were times where I said, okay, I want to talk about this, but I need for you to not, and I would name some of the behaviors that he would commonly engage in when we were in conversations. And I commit to not doing, these things that drove him absolutely nuts. Can we agree on that? And then engage in this conversation. And the ground rules can shift and change. And, we've been probably part of work meetings where we're having really hard conversations and we put up on a board these ground rules for these conversations. We can take little mini versions of that and apply them into the conversations we have with individuals or groups of people.
My question refers to the amount of information that we're being bombarded with every day. And forgive me if you've already discussed that, but it's loud, it's noisy, and it does provide for the discourse that we're seeing today. And it's reaching down to our children as well. And we can't solve it by just saying, listen to somebody or take your time. They've already kind of come to the conclusion that it's not going to work that way. I have to be prepared to fight. If I don't fight, I'm going to get chewed up. And so I'm going to fight back to protect myself, as you said, but I'm also going to make sure that no one else comes for me again. And that's what I think people are seeing, as opposed to taking the time, pulling out a newspaper and reading it and taking all day, then getting home and not remembering everything you read, getting ready to eat, going to bed and having a nice evening and getting up the next day and starting that. Instead, I hear it all day long. It's everywhere. I've gone to a rest home and they were arguing in there. And so because there's one TV and somebody had control of the cable channel. So it's not gonna stop. Sometimes I think we really need to try and figure out, like I said, people want to fight. I don't know exactly how you're going to get through that.
we call the people that put all that crap out there, we call them conflict entrepreneurs. They're making big money on it and making on getting us stirred up and making us angry. And so we're just trying to resist that. There are two news sources that I can highly recommend that show take an issue and take it from both sides and do a very fair job and to show you where your blind spots are. One of them is Tangle. They send out a daily newsletter. The other one is Ground News. It's an app you can get on your phone and it will tell you where your blind spots are. I mean, and again, we can only work on us. You know, we can't work on the anger of other people. We can only do us. But, okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you for all the good ideas that you've given us. Thank you for your questions. This is the closing of our presentation tonight, but I had a few announcements. Okay. So I do want to say that if you're not a member of the League of Women Voters, please go on our website if you're interested in joining. We would welcome you. And we also welcome men. So it's not just women. Okay. The other thing is, if you're registered to vote, please vote. It doesn't help to register and then not vote. If you do not get registered, you may still vote. Well, first of all, October 21st is the deadline for registering. But if you don't get registered by the 21st, you can still vote by going to your polls on Election Day and asking for a provisional ballot. Okay. I figure everybody here is already registered. I see people going, she doesn't have to tell us that. But I thought I'd just hedge our bets. Okay, our voter hotline at the League of Women Voters will begin October 26th, and it'll run through Election Day. So if people have questions about what resources to seek out or to look for to get answers to their voting questions, they can call our voter hotline and somebody will be able to steer them in the right direction. And then we actually had some handouts. I think they're probably at the back table where we signed in. And the voter handouts, one of them is a postcard, and it has some information on it about the John R. Lewis Voting Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. And we're really encouraging people to contact their local legislators and encourage them to thank them, first of all, because many of them in California are already in support of those issues, but to try to convince your colleagues, to also vote for the John R. Lewis Voting Act. It's HR 14 and S4. Okay, so please do that. Actually, we've had an action alert where every 15th of the month we've been sending out information to our legislators so that they would take notice, because all of a sudden there's an influx, okay? Also, is there a handout for the QR codes? Okay, it's on the table. There's a handout there that has the information about some of the resources that you can get a hold of, contact. We are going to have another event after the election on November 23rd at 10 a.m. in Maxwell House. We're going to be talking about the Electoral College. So that's another issue that the League nationally is actually has a study underway, and we would like to learn as much as we can about the Electoral College at that time. So we would welcome you all there. It is free. We do appreciate when people go online and register for the events, just so that our events committee knows how many refreshments to plan on. But you can always walk in as well if you need to. Okay? Anything else? Do we have any other
Question,
announcements?
what's the score?
7-2, bottom of the sixth.
Okay. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here tonight. And we really, hope that we see you again at the other events. And thank you, panel. You were wonderful. And again, a big thank you to All Saints, all of you people that are All Saints people. Thank you so much for hosting us tonight. This is just a lovely venue, and everybody has been so welcoming. So thank you for that. Okay, so have a nice evening and finish up the Dodger game.